One fine day, when the girl was sitting at the table with her parents and other people, she heard simply terrible news. The father turned to Elena and said that the time had finally come for her to get married. The others present, as soon as they heard this, froze, just like the girl herself. But the young lady was so surprised that she even broke the egg she was holding in her hands with one hand. For a while, everyone sat in silence. The people around were the first to break this deathly silence. They were very surprised, but in fact, they had heard about it before. And besides, they did not understand how the girl could be so strong at all, since she was able to break the egg in her hand. Elena, meanwhile, asked her father for forgiveness and said that she simply did not expect it. The man certainly felt a little uncomfortable about this, but he did not pay much attention to it. So Elena herself asked why he suddenly started talking about marriage. Her father, smiling happily, said that she knew that annual hunting competitions were held on their territory. This was a long-standing tradition in their town. However, this time there were especially many furious beasts, so they decided to grant a special privilege to the final winner, and the privilege was the marriage to Helen. Of course, the girl could not believe that all this was true, and she did not like it. But she realized the fact that there was no way back. Her father smiled and said that this was actually just great news for both sides. He explained his position by saying that it must have been very difficult for her to run a department store on her own. If she had married the winner, she would no longer have to do that and would have been able to abide by the rules of the territory. In particular, he was really very happy with this news and said that she could finally become a true member of this land, and this was a truly honorable thing for the whole family. The people around immediately began to talk among themselves. They thought that the winner of this hunting competition should be the headman's son himself. And given this difference in their status, people believed that it was a great honor for Elena to get such a husband for herself. So they all believed that she should take advantage of this opportunity and not waste her chance. But in fact, the girl was not as inspired as they all were, because she completely forgot that there was a rule that had to be followed after reaching adulthood in the territory in which she lived. And this rule was to get married and maintain an ordinary traditional family. For this reason, Elena had to fulfill it very soon. Having collected her thoughts, the girl smiled happily and said that she knew the rules of their territory well, but she would like to find her husband on her own, so she asked to be given some time to look for him. The man looked at her intently and also said that they did everything for her own happiness and asked if she even knew how much they were worried about the fact that the girl still could not find a partner. Of course, Elena knew that they were not worried at all, because this man, who was the leader and entered into a conversation with her father, was simply trying to marry her off to his son. Of course, she didn't like this at all. Other people also began to agree with her head. They said that Elena had had enough of living alone. She had to finally find a partner for herself. Some even argued that it was incredibly dangerous for a young girl like her to live alone, and at that moment, Elena realized that everything was useless. She would have to pretend that she agreed with it, and later she could find a way to refuse. Then the head stood up and touched the girl on the shoulders and said that since she didn't have the one she was dating at that time, she should have listened to the owner of the territory and gotten married. But at that moment, a young and very tall guy approached the girl from behind. He grabbed this leader by the hand and took it away from Elena. Of course, the man started yelling at him, asking what he was doing. But in the meantime, the guy put his arm around the girl's shoulder and said that it was a great honor for him to meet him for the first time. This guy had beautiful silver hair and blue eyes. He and Elena looked absolutely stunning, and he said that he was her husband. Of course, people, having heard this, immediately began to spread various rumors, because they had never heard about this before, and this news simply captivated them. Elena herself was a little surprised. She looked at this man and was even glad that he came, because in fact she already had a husband, whose identity until that moment was completely unknown to anyone. And this man was a rather suspicious husband for her. Of course, she did not trust him, but despite this, he helped her to at least slightly get rid of this whole crowd. In fact, when the girl was still very little, she was often bullied. She had to endure cold looks from people and sometimes even stones to the head. Children at that age were especially cruel, and the territory, which was located in the southernmost edge of the empire, was also surrounded by mountains and various animals. Therefore, due to the geographical features, the connections between the populations of this territory were strong, and the spirit of interdependence was deeply rooted. Therefore, it was quite natural for them to be afraid of a newborn child abandoned on the border of the territory. This child was Elena. At that moment, she really became a completely new adventure for them, and therefore the girl did not expect any good attitude from them towards her, because she understood everything, and the only people who accepted her without any prejudice were her current parents. But one day, something terrible happened to her. Elena had somehow managed to develop the cursed power within herself, and now that she was looking back, she realized that this power was not the power of a landowner, but an ability that was called hidden. Since she was still a very small child at that time, she was unable to control her enormous strength, and in this closed territory, she simply became an object of fear and humiliation from others. And eventually, she simply became known as the Monster's Child, which is the nickname that the city's residents remember most. Her parents also treated the girl like an ordinary child for a time, and of course, raised her with great love. However, one day they simply disappeared, leaving the city to trade goods. Of course, Elena was very worried that she was simply taken and abandoned, because she could have done something wrong. However, these warm hands did not seem like a lie to her. She really believed that one day her parents could return, and for this reason, the girl opened a department store, which was run by her parents. She decided to take over the place, and although the stigma of being a monster child did not completely disappear, but since it was the only general store in the area, residents eventually began to come to her. Some even seemed to care for her, and out of pity, because she was left completely alone after all those years that she spent with her parents, who for some unknown reason loved her. This is how Elena was simply able to adapt and survive for so many days. But all this wonderful time lasted only until one day that changed her fate. One day, when the girl was heading to her store for work, she heard some strange sounds from the bushes and immediately looked in to see who was there. She saw the silver-haired guy and was very surprised, not understanding what he was doing sleeping in her garden. It was precisely that day when she met her husband. It was a face she had never seen before, and the girl at that moment even thought that he could be a nobleman. However, then she looked at his clothes and realized that for a nobleman, his appearance was too awkward. So she reached out her hand straight to the guy and, asking for forgiveness for disturbing him, asked if everything was okay here, and also if he was injured somewhere. When she didn't even have time to touch him, the guy opened his eyes and saw Elena. He immediately hit her on the hand, moving it away because he was scared. The girl did not expect such a violent reaction. She immediately felt uncomfortable about it, and she asked him for forgiveness for scaring him. However, at that moment, he suddenly reached his hand towards her throat. She immediately tried to stop him, but he was quite strong. At that moment, Elena was seriously scared. She didn't understand what he was doing with his hand, why he was trying to touch her throat as if he wanted to strangle her. And the moment his hand was almost at her throat, she immediately hit him very hard. He removed his hand, and she said that it was very rude. Then, Elena started yelling at him and asked who was the one who reached out and touched the person the moment he opened his eyes and saw the stranger. The girl did not understand at all what was happening then, but the guy then extended his shaking hand forward again and asked how she was able to block it. He looked completely strange. His gaze suddenly became darker, and in a quiet voice, he asked the girl who she was anyway. Elena looked at him in surprise, not understanding why he suddenly became so serious. She then began to look closely at the man and noticed that he didn't really look like he was a local. However, up close, when she began to examine him, he was even more beautiful. He had a face like a sculpture, just as graceful and delicate. Then, she suddenly realized that this was absolutely the wrong time to be staring. Firstly, she had to remain calm because he didn't know who she was, which meant he hadn't heard the rumors. Therefore, the girl, getting to her feet, suddenly began to shout at him, asking who he was anyway. She decided that the best way was to go on the offensive. The girl screamed loudly at him and said that he had just attacked the man who was trying to help him. She did not understand this at all. Elena came even closer to him and leaned over, saying that he clearly didn't understand what was going on around him if he allowed himself to do something like that. When she explained that he was lying there on the ground and she tried to wake him up, and also to clarify the situation, she said that this was actually her territory at home. Elena didn't even give him a chance to get a word in. She pointed her hand at her chest and said that he was the one who screwed up first and then started attacking her. So she didn't understand at all how he could have such a lack of manners. The man then suddenly asked if she really said that he was guilty. This, of course, made her even more angry. She told him to open his eyes and see what he had done. The guy looked back and saw some berries on the ground, while the girl explained that he was the one who broke into her house without permission and even destroyed the gardens that she worked so hard on. She also said that she had screwed up and asked how much longer he was going to act like an idiot. Then the man looked at her with a pitiful look and asked if she really thought he had broken in on her. Elena didn't understand at all what was wrong with this man. First, he tried to attack her, and now he was pretending as if he didn't understand at all what she was talking about. Because the girl was confused and her voice was shaking, she decided to continue to insist on her own and said that the least he could do in this situation was to apologize. The guy continued to look at her with a surprised look and asked if, in her opinion, he was the only one who should apologize in their situation. At that moment, she began to wonder whether he was simply shameless or ignorant. She thought that he really had no decency, so with a heavy sigh, she said that she would let him go as a wrongdoer, but he had to pay her for the ruined garden. But the man looked completely calm and simply replied that he had absolutely no money, so he could not do it. This information angered Elena even more. She immediately asked if it was really a joke that he was wearing such a cool outfit with gold buttons and talking about being broke. Then the man looked at his cufflinks and said that she could take one of them since she wanted him to pay so badly. At that moment, he really looked incredibly pathetic. Elena was even a little surprised. She asked if he was really just going to give her the torn-off decoration from his outfit. The man explained that she wanted compensation, so this was all he could offer her in return. In fact, Elena still thought that this was too much, and she thought about the fact that he was just an ignorant worker. And now she was taking away from him rather expensive things that he worked hard for. For this reason, she gave him this decoration and told him to take it away. She didn't need something like that. Elena was well aware of the fact that she was taking it, and it was wrong to do so. She even thought about giving him some change or something like that. But at that moment, she suddenly heard a rumbling in her stomach. The girl knew that it was hers, and the man immediately felt a little uncomfortable about it because they were having a serious conversation. And then his stomach rumbled. Elena was surprised. She immediately looked at the man and asked in an alarmed voice if he was hungry. She herself thought about the fact that she had to feed him, because he was ready to give even an expensive cufflink in order to repay her. So the girl, folding her arms on her chest, told him to follow her. She explained that since the situation had already become so acute, she would like him to at least allow her to treat him to lunch. After some time, they came to her room. She immediately said that he could come in, and as soon as the man was inside, he began to examine her rather fascinating interior. The girl walked forward and said that she would cook dinner, but in the meantime, he needed to go and wash himself because he was all dirty. Well, the man, indignant, immediately said that at that moment he was really hungry and therefore did not want to wash. He wanted to eat first. As soon as Elena heard this, she was very angry and immediately pointed at him and said that, of course, he could not eat in such a dirty state. In the end, the man had to agree. He said that he would go wash himself and also wished that she would prepare dinner as soon as possible. The girl herself at that moment sighed heavily and thought about why he was behaving like a little child. However, she didn't have time to think about it for long. She really needed to get down to business because she was also hungry. When she began to follow the man with her eyes, she noticed that he looked quite strong and, in fact, he was exactly her type in a man. And he behaved like a slightly frivolous person. Of course, she didn't really like this kind of character, but she believed that it was a little easier with such people. At that moment, while the man began to undress, he glanced at Elena, who did not take her eyes off him. She quickly turned away and thought about what she was thinking about. The girl went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. She even felt ashamed of those thoughts. She could not believe that she even thought about such things. She decided that she needed to just forget about all of this as soon as possible, and believed that when the man left, everything would fall into place for her. Elena also suggested that it was most likely because lately everyone had been pestering her with questions about marriage, and most likely she had already begun to consider this man as her partner. Of course, everyone told her that as soon as she became an adult, she simply had to get married. Those were the rules of their territory. That's how the world was set up. If a girl didn't get married at the right time, people would of course treat her like something broken. And since Elena's reputation was not very good anyway, she certainly didn't want this to happen to her. The moment she began to reach the age to marry, she began to experience quite a lot of pressure from those around her in the city. And at some point, she even tried to force herself to meet some guys, just so that all these constant conversations would stop. The girl, of course, did not want to get married so early. She wanted to wait for some time and find the one, but at this point, she simply had no choice. Besides, how to come to terms with it and move on? However, ever since she started having rather strange dreams, her way of thinking began to change, and this made the girl quite alarmed. These strange dreams began to haunt her as soon as she became an adult. In her dreams, it seemed to her as if she were living someone else's life and received a vivid glimpse into the lives of people from another world. These dreams were very vivid, and the more she saw them, the more the thoughts and lives of these people penetrated the girl's consciousness. And it was they who had an influence on her subconscious. And of course, it was the example of these people that was able to even change the girl's worldview after that. Instead of pursuing everything that others called normal, Elena decided that she would simply live life for herself. She saw an example that it is not always necessary to get married in order to be successful. It would be possible to reach the top on your own and be happy. Of course, this constant pressure that was put on the girl, who was also involved in marriage, was still quite a lot of stress for her. Yes, she simply had no choice. She wanted to come to terms with it, and after some time, she finally set the table, prepared dinner, and told the man about it. While she was waiting for him, she thought about the fact that in fact, if a guy like him, who, in her opinion, was her type, became her husband, then perhaps everything would not be so bad. Well, at that moment, she suddenly blushed a little because she didn't understand what she was even thinking about, because she didn't know this person at all, and of course, it was incredibly dangerous. Even the thought of it made her shudder. It's just that he used to drive her crazy, and of course, it's impossible to judge a person only by appearance. She had to know his inner qualities, even though all this made her wary. Elena had absolutely no idea what was happening to her and why she was even thinking about something like that. But at that moment, the bathroom door opened, and the girl was very happy that he had finally washed himself. But as soon as she saw him, she blushed even more and felt incredibly awkward and ashamed of what she saw. In front of Elena stood a man whose torso was open and water was still running down it. And in the meantime, he was putting on a shirt so as not to embarrass her. Elena immediately started yelling at him and asked why he came out looking like that. The man was very surprised to hear this and did not understand what exactly she meant. He immediately replied that he did not understand her complaint since she herself told him to wash himself. Meanwhile, Elena thought about the fact that she actually did not tell him that he could just leave the bathroom naked. So, turning away from his naked torso, she told him to wait a while because she had completely forgotten to give him a towel. And when she finally saw the towel and took it in her hands, she began to walk towards the man. But because she was very worried, she accidentally tripped. Elena couldn't stay on her feet and started to fall, but the man noticed it in time and was able to grab her hand so that she wouldn't fall. And since the girl herself did not want to hit her head, she grabbed his shirt and then they both ended up on the floor. Only the man was on top of her with a bare torso. For some time they lay like this and looked at each other. And Elena was simply in a panic. She did not understand what had happened, and most importantly, how. When she finally realized what was happening, she screamed at him and told him not to just stand on top of her, but to finally move away. And the man did just that. Elena, meanwhile, crawled away from him in horror, as if he was somehow poisonous, and for some time she just sat on the floor, trying to understand what she needed to do next. But soon, she finally got to her feet and said that she needed to step away for a while. She asked him to dry himself with this towel and start eating quickly. The man sat there for some time, completely confused. He did not understand what had happened and how he was supposed to understand what the girl wanted from him. However, when he started eating, she finally returned and sat down opposite him, and they ate in complete silence. And since Elena still felt awkward after that situation, quite often that image of the man with his chest bare popped into her head, and she decided that she needed to stop playing it out in her head because it was confusing her, but she just couldn't do it. However, when she looked at his expression, which was completely carefree, she assumed that it didn't bother him at all, and this, of course, surprised her. She assumed that he had most likely been hungry for quite a long time, since he began to eat everything very quickly and even grabbed the bread first. At first glance, Elena thought that he was a nobleman, but he ate such simple food perfectly and without any hesitation, so she did not understand at all how he could find out about their village and how he came. She was silent for a while, and when the man reached for another piece of bread, she told him not to hurry, because there was food and it wouldn't go anywhere, and also asked if she matched his status. The guy immediately replied that it was definitely so. It was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten in his life, and therefore he was grateful to her. As soon as Elena heard that it was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten in his life, she was very surprised, because it was a fairly simple dish that she had prepared in a matter of minutes. So she thought about the fact that a nobleman could definitely eat more expensive food, which meant that she was most likely wrong when she assumed that he had a high status. In order to find out more, she decided to ask him what he usually ate. The man did not answer for some time, as if he had plunged into the memories of his past. And after a long silence, he finally said that he ate hard biscuits and watery soup because the people who were his masters gave him only that. At that moment, Elena suddenly thought about the fact that most likely the reason why he looked so sad, dirty, and carefree was because he was a slave. Then she asked the man to tell her in detail about his owners, where these people were now, and how he was able to get out of the estate and end up in their village. The girl showed quite a strong interest, but the man sighed heavily and actually said that he knew nothing. After that, he sighed heavily again and said that all he could vaguely remember was that the guys who tried to stop him from leaving were ready to kill him, so he had to get rid of them one by one. However, then suddenly everything flashed with white light, and when he opened his eyes, he was already in this place, knowing absolutely nothing about what happened in the interval between these two events. Elena looked at him in surprise and asked if he really thought that she could believe this. But the man did not understand why he would not believe her, because it was the truth. Then the girl thought about the fact that, according to his story, he looked like a slave who had caused disorder in a noble house and simply taken and ran away. The real problem was that in their time, slavery was forbidden by imperial law, and since the nobles were probably holding him illegally, they were trying to deal with it quietly so that the empire wouldn't find out that the boy had managed to escape. And Elena understood that even if their village was quite remote, the tracker would still be able to find a way to this place quite quickly. So she decided it was best to send him away before she got involved in something very unpleasant and dangerous. She couldn't allow a misunderstanding just because she offered him food. Soon, when their dinner was over, they went outside and the girl said that since he had already finished, it was time for him to go further, because she also had her own things to do. She waved goodbye to him and wondered if this should have been enough compensation for the gold cufflink that he had eventually given her as payment. Before she left, the girl also said that if he turned left here and continued straight ahead, he would be able to reach another village as well. She said that it was nice to meet him and asked him to travel safely. The man did not answer. Then the girl returned to her home and thought that it was finally time to thoroughly clean her store, which was located right next to her house. She had so many things to do, and also to buy new items for her store, but for some reason she couldn't get to work because she had some kind of dirty feeling inside. Elena thought about that man and realized that he seemed like the kind of person who didn't understand anything at all, and she wondered if he could find a safe place anywhere along his path. However, at that moment the doors to her store opened. She thought that it was the customers who had already said hello, but as soon as she turned her head back, she saw that it was exactly that same man. Of course, Elena was very surprised by this. She immediately said that she had said that he could have already left, and therefore asked why he had returned. The guy, meanwhile, came closer to her and said that he wanted to give her compensation for the food. The girl did not understand at all what he was talking about and asked what he meant. In fact, she really hoped that he would not pay her again for the debt like with the golden button, because there really was no need for it, and she did not ask him about it. Then, Elena thought that she needed to find the simplest thing as quickly as possible, so that he would quickly complete it and finally leave. So the girl said that since he really wanted to repay her for the food, he could help her with one thing. She explained that there was nothing complicated about it and asked him to follow her. Then she escorted the man into one room and told him to help her move all this junk. The man, seeing these boxes, immediately asked if it was really necessary to move everything. Elena immediately said that it was so. After that, she thought about the topic that she was interested in how much money he thought was needed for this dinner, since he offered his help. But she still took pity on him because she didn't want him to pay her with anything at all. The man sighed heavily and agreed. He walked forward and began to do his job because he really wanted to help her. The girl, meanwhile, paid attention to him and was surprised that he agreed so easily because she thought that he would start to somehow resist this and want some other option. However, she closed the room and thought that I shouldn't worry about it now that she had an assistant she could hurry up and finish her own business as well. And in fact, working together really did become much faster and easier, and despite the fact that there was a tense silence between them at that moment, the girls really liked it. As soon as Elena noticed how easily he was dragging the box, she smiled and said that he really did it very well, and thus she praised him. The guy didn't answer this, but in fact it took them quite a long time. That's work. But the girl was glad that he offered his help after all, because that way she got it done much faster. And besides, she was pleasantly surprised by the fact that the man worked very hard, which was more than she expected. She began to think that maybe he wasn't quite the person she initially thought he was. And so through working together, she was able to get to know him a little better. While Elena continued to sort through her things, she even thought about the fact that perhaps she might even regret sending him back, because he could have been a very good helper for her. However, the moment she raised her head up, she saw that a huge box began to fall straight at her, and the girl was unable to react. But fortunately for Elena, the man managed to come up to her in time. He covered her with his body, and when it was all over, he asked if everything was okay with her. The girl was shocked when she looked at this man who saved her, and now she completely thought about her attitude towards him. Elena immediately thanked him for his help, after which she asked if he was injured, because the boxes really were very heavy. The guy immediately got scared from the dust and said that there was nothing wrong with it. Elena then suddenly took his hand and asked him to let her examine it, because it could really be a very serious injury. She also said that she didn't want the situation to become more dangerous unnecessarily, so she needed to give him a good look. When the man took off his shirt, she immediately began to examine his body to check if there were any fresh wounds on it. And then she suddenly thought about the fact that the blow from these boxes must have been incredibly strong. However, when she looked at his body, she noticed that there was not even a scratch, which of course really surprised her. Of course, for her, this was something unusual. And besides, when she looked around, she noticed that some of the things that fell after the box were also very heavy and could seriously injure him. But now, when she looked at his body, which was completely undamaged, she did not understand how this was even possible. When she finished the examination, the guy looked at her and asked if everything was okay. And at that moment, Elena thought about who this person really was. But before he started putting on his shirt, the girl asked him to wait another minute and asked if he was sure that he didn't have pain somewhere inside, for example, because it could have been an internal injury. The guy thoughtfully said that everything was fine with him. He didn't understand why she was so worried about him. After which, he put his shirt back on. Elena continued to sit on the floor while the man left. She could not understand if this was really true. How after such a blow, he could just calmly continue walking. She thought about how he had been hit by a falling box and ended up being perfectly fine, as if nothing had happened, and that made her actually worry. She even thought about the fact that perhaps this person, like herself, was unusual. Perhaps he had some hidden abilities that no one knew about. Several more hours passed from that moment, and finally, they sorted through all the garbage that had collected, and everything was ready. Elena, smiling happily, said that if she had done all this, it would have taken her even a few days. And thanking the man, she said that only thanks to him, she was able to cope so quickly. Elena looked at the man and said that she was truly incredibly grateful to him. But at that moment, his stomach began to rumble again. This surprised her a little, but she smiled and said that since it was already getting dark, he was probably already hungry, and she asked what he thought about having a snack. As soon as the guy heard that she was offering him to eat again, he was very surprised and asked if that would be okay. Elena continued to smile and said that since he had helped her before, she was ready to actually feed him again as a sign of gratitude, since he had done quite a lot of work. She also said that this time, of course, she would not need compensation for the food he ate, so the man did not have to worry about this anymore. The guy thought about it for a while, and then a small smile appeared on his face. He was really grateful to this woman for this, and so he agreed. Several hours passed since then, and it was already completely dark outside. The girl finally prepared dinner for them and set the table. She cooked a very tasty meat and said that she treated this matter with special care because he worked hard to help her, and therefore she would like to thank him with a delicious dinner. As soon as the man saw this wonderful meat, his stomach immediately began to rumble. He had never eaten more food like this in his life. Then the girl poured him some wine into a glass, saying that she had even brought some special alcohol with her, so she said that he could drink it to bring out the taste of the meat even better. Smiling, she said that this after-work drink really tasted great. It was very refreshing and calming, so she was happy to share it with the man. For a moment, the guy doubted whether he should drink it, but as soon as he tried it, he immediately pushed the glass aside. In fact, Elna was a little surprised because she had never seen such an expression on a man's face before, but it even looked pretty cute how he grimaced after trying something new for himself. Then the girl herself drank and thought that, since she had kept him quite late that day, she believed that she should have allowed him to stay until the next morning so that he would not walk around at night. But at that moment, the man took a knife and stabbed a huge piece of meat on it. She immediately screamed at him and asked him to stop for at least a minute because he was doing it wrong. The guy was surprised, but he looked at her and didn't understand what was wrong. Elena then asked why he used the knife in exactly that way. The man, meanwhile, did not understand at all what she wanted from him and immediately asked if this was really not how he wanted to eat. The girl said that she certainly understood that he was hungry, but nevertheless the doll had to observe the rules of manners while eating. The man, having heard about manners, did not understand anything at all, but decided to ask her what he should have done in that case. Then the girl realized that now that she thought about it, she realized that he had never eaten such food before, and therefore did not know how to use all these devices correctly. She calmed down a little and immediately asked him to look at her. Then she showed him how he was supposed to cut the meat into small pieces with a knife. After that, she said that as soon as the meat was cut, he could pick it up with a fork, which was located on the side of his plate. The man immediately began to repeat everything after Elena. The girl immediately thought about the fact that he unconditionally began to work hard and repeat everything as she showed him. She even considered it quite cute. Of course it was very awkward, but he eventually managed to do it, so she even smiled and said that he was a good boy. In fact, when Elena first saw him, he looked very dangerous to her, but now that he had washed himself, he seemed to her like just an innocent child. He still didn't know so much about this world, and for this reason, he learned everything like a child. Then she suddenly turned to him and said that she was thinking about what her friend was about, that she didn't even know his name. She immediately said hers and asked what his name was. The man then said in a sad voice that he had no name, so he could not answer her this question. As soon as Elena heard this, she immediately felt very sad. And then she decided to ask what they called him during the entire time he was with those owners. The man suddenly became very serious and sad. He said that when he was little, his name was Monster. Sometimes they just called him Hey, and that was all he was distracted by. Of course, the girl was very angry when she heard this. She could not believe that a living person who had feelings and could think was actually called that way. The man suddenly wondered what significance this had at all, since he was practically not even called by any name, so he did not consider it offensive. At that moment, Elena thought about the fact that this man was indeed quite unusual, but somehow she could fully understand his reaction to the events that were taking place. She thought about the fact that perhaps this man had gone through something similar to what she had at one time, and because of this, she could understand him. But then suddenly, the man turned to her and said that she could simply call him you, so that it would be more convenient for her if that was what was needed. Of course, she didn't like all this. She said that a name is actually something important in a person's life, and for this reason, she couldn't just call him you. She said in a very serious voice that it was an expression that allowed him to exist and be who he was, and for that reason, the name was simply necessary. She said that with its help, he could live as a human being. So since they were talking about this topic, she thought that she could choose some name for him. Elena thought about what name to choose for him because she really didn't want to call him that, but you considered it immoral. Then she suddenly turned to the man and asked him if he had any ideas. For example, what he wanted men to call him at that moment. He was really very surprised and said that he had never thought about it. Then he thought about the words the girl had said, about how he should have had a name as a person, because he had never been recognized as a person since birth. The woman who gave birth to him simply rejected the boy, calling him a real monster, and the owner who took him in treated him like an instrument, saying that he should never think about anything. He simply gave him orders without even asking the guy's opinion on the matter. Even on the battlefield, his will had no meaning. He was just a man who did everything he was told. Elena then thoughtfully said that since he didn't even have any options for a name, they could think about what name would suit him best. Then she smiled and asked what he thought about the name Jaden. In fact, the man was surprised that this girl treated him like a real person for the first time. Something like this had never happened to him before, so it was a truly new experience. Hearing this name, he wondered whether he liked it or not. Elena immediately thought that perhaps it was not so good for him, and said that they could think of another name if he did not like it. But Jaden immediately said that this was not so. He really liked this name, and even a sincere smile appeared on his face. As soon as Elena saw his smile, she was amazed. Her heart suddenly began to beat a little stronger from the fact that he really liked the name that she had chosen for him, and she smiled and said that she was very glad. In fact, she had never seen him smile like that in all this time, and it made her very happy. Now that she thought about it all, she realized that her first impression of this man was absolutely terrible. But today, she received a lot of help from him, and Jaden even saved her life. He did it without any hesitation, even though those boxes could have caused him a lot of pain. He just did it, and Elena was amazed by his courage. Of course, she was incredibly ashamed of herself for thinking badly of this person. But she realized that if this were a normal case, she would try to get this person out of the house as quickly as possible. But given the situation and how well he listened to her, she decided to make a different decision. After a long silence, she turned to him and said that if he had not yet decided where to go, she would like to know if he would like to stay in this place for a while, and she could accept him. And Jaden, hearing this, was amazed. Elena smiled happily and said that as long as he stayed in this place, he could help her with work, for example. He could do the gardening, help in the store, or just do housework. Smiling, she said that they could do it together, or he could help her with something tomorrow. So she asked what he thought about it, and if he would like to stay at her house with her. Jaden was amazed, but a few days after he agreed to live with her, they became a pretty good team. She decided to clean her store very well, and when she was doing this one day, she asked if he could bring her a few more items from the warehouse, since the boxes there were quite heavy. Meanwhile, Elena swept the floor and thought about the fact that at first, she thought about whether she had rushed to offer him such a serious decision. But in the end, she was even glad that he was obedient, and so far nothing bad had happened. For this reason, she decided that she shouldn't worry. At that moment, the door to the store suddenly opened, and the girl immediately addressed the visitors, saying that they were still closed, so she asked them to wait a little longer before going in. However, the man who came inside was persistent. He turned to Elena and asked how she was doing. It was a dark-haired young guy. The girl immediately began to address him very warily. His name was Hans, and she asked why he came again. The guy smiled smugly and asked what kind of reaction she had, and also asked if the relationship between them was too strained when they were about to get married. Elena stood at a distance from him, sighing heavily. and was shocked that they were having this terrible conversation about marriage with her again. This man was a Hans, and in this village, he was the son of the head and behaved as if he was already the owner, and for this reason did everything he wanted, since it of course remained unpunished for him. When they were children, Hans had made others bully Elena and called her a monster. But now he kept telling her that they should have married each other and constantly pestered her. Of course, the girl was incredibly irritated by all this, because she had no intention of marrying this man, and this excessive attention was disgusting to her. Therefore, turning away from the man, she said that she had told him clearly and distinctly several times already that she would definitely not marry him. Of course, Elena was no longer going to walk on eggshells as she had before. She had had enough. She had a successful business and was no longer going to adapt to others. Hans, meanwhile, came closer to her and asked if she was still upset with him because of what happened when they were still children. He had said that all boys were like that, so it was very stupid of her to hold a grudge. But the girl immediately replied that she did not want to hear such ridiculous excuses, and therefore would really like him to just go away and leave her alone. The guy, meanwhile, waved his hand and told her not to behave so cruelly, because he even considered her as a potential partner, and also asked who else would take such a girl with her number of shortcomings. So he thought that it should be an honor for her that he offered to become his wife. But Elena did not understand why he constantly had these terribly annoying conversations about her shortcomings, so she turned to him and immediately asked why he was clinging to someone like her with so many flaws. Hans was silent for a while after that and said that he had not clung to anyone at all. He had simply accepted her because he felt very sorry for her. He understood that she could have been left completely alone, and that was why he wanted to save her from this fate. The guy also said that, in fact, it would have been much better for her if he had actually accepted her. For this reason, he believed that she had acted completely stupidly since she had rejected him in such a way. But once again, Elena made it clear to him that she needed absolutely nothing, and she had no intention of being connected to him in any way, so he could stop his efforts. She also came closer to him, pushed him right in the chest with her finger, and said that she didn't even have the slightest thought of marrying him, so he could not count on anything. Elena also asked him to stop pursuing her in this way, which made Hans feel a little awkward, since he was always used to being a winner. So, moving away from the girl, he said that she must have really been in a bad mood that day, since she was saying such nonsense. Then he saw some boxes that were standing to the side, and said that she shouldn't have carried such heavy things because she was a girl, so he offered to help and move them where they needed to go. Elena immediately replied that she could do it herself, so she asked him to just leave her alone and go about his business. But the guy already approached the boxes, and taking them, said that if she could put them away herself, she would have done it a long time ago. Hans took one of the boxes and said that such things should be done by strong men, and she just had to stand aside and watch as he did it. However, the box turned out to be much heavier than he thought. Because of this, the guy almost dropped it, but he managed to react in time and held on to it. He sighed heavily and said that only someone like him could handle such weights, and asked Elena how she could even imagine that she would even move this box. The girl who was watching all this understood perfectly well that he was doing this on purpose, and also realized the fact that he wanted to say this. But at that moment, she decided to teach him a lesson with her visor, and it happened right at that phrase when Hans said that she definitely couldn't do anything without him. Elena, of course, threw the box over her shoulder with absolute ease, and it wasn't even difficult for her. She looked at him with a hateful gaze and said that she had already told him that she didn't need help. As soon as the guy saw this, he was amazed and immediately turned to her and asked how she lifted this box so easily, because it was really hard for him. Hansa smiled and immediately asked if she shouldn't have become normal now. But then, suddenly, he asked if this really meant that she had been fooling the whole village all this time by saying that everything was okay with her now. He thought that her strength was because she had magical abilities, but Elena wondered if that was what was bothering him so much at that moment. She asked if he really wanted to marry her so much that he even pretended that he didn't care at all what her background was or what abilities she had. Of course, she was aware of the fact that he was disgusted by her, so she asked him to stop pretending as if it meant nothing at the moment when he was trying to win her over. It was all very pathetic and looked ridiculous. At that moment, The guy said that he really felt sorry for her because she was very lonely, and that's why he treated her kindly, but she in turn dared to deceive their villagers and make them look like fools. He walked towards the girl, raising his hand up and shouting loudly. Hans asked if she really thought that they could leave it all like that. At that moment, Elena became even more angry. She thought that this idiot really understood absolutely nothing about life and had gone too far. At that moment, as the man swung, to his great happiness, Jaden came. He intercepted his hand and held it so tightly that the guy couldn't even move it. Of course, Hans was very surprised by this. He immediately looked at the young guy who was holding the box in his hands and asked what he was doing, and also asked him to immediately let go of his hand. Elena, seeing Jaden, was very surprised. However, Hans meanwhile continued to shout, saying that he was the son of the head, and asked if he really thought that he could just get away with it. But Elena noticed that Jaden was becoming even more angry. The atmosphere seemed tense, and he became as cold as he was when they first met. Then the girl realized that this could have ended very badly, because that time he grabbed her by the throat and was even ready to strangle her. When the guy started squeezing Hans's hand even harder, he immediately started screaming. He said that it was very painful and asked him to let him go immediately. Elena was well aware of this fact, that the situation had become more and more serious, so she turned to the Jaden and asked him to let him go, because in this way they would definitely not resolve the situation. The guy immediately obeyed her. Hans, meanwhile, grabbed his hand and asked the girl for what reason this stranger interfered in their situation and even threatened him. He walked away from this house and shouted loudly that he certainly did not intend to leave this. He definitely wanted to tell his father about this, so they had to wait for their punishment. Elena reacted to this calmly. She said that if he liked it so much, then he could do it. She no longer intended to somehow beg him not to do it. After that, she took her box again and told Jaden that he had always been like this, so the guy just needed to ignore him. She came closer to him and immediately asked if everything was okay with him, because it was possible that he might not like what happened, and she had to find out. The guy was a little surprised by her question, so he didn't answer anything. He just looked at her with his big blue eyes. Elena, meanwhile, put the box down and thought about how now he looked as if it didn't bother him at all. Well, then she realized that Hans had threatened her first anyway, so it was just self-defense. So she decided that I wasn't worth worrying about and just smiled. She also wondered if this situation could spread throughout the village and cause shock among those around her. But Elena would soon find out about it. It was indeed so that the people around learned from Hans that Elena had been deceiving them all this time. The guy, meanwhile, said a lot of things about the girl. He said that she was already in shock, and as soon as he found out this information, she immediately began to humiliate him. In fact, he was very pleased because people now began to distrust Elena and had to radically change their attitude towards her. They were now afraid of her. As soon as Hans managed to make his insidious plan, he thought that everything happened as he expected. Everything went wrong for the girl's reputation, which is exactly what he hoped for. The man was certainly a little bothered by the fact that the guy had attacked him like that, but he assumed that since he was a stranger, it was an obvious reaction. However, Hans thought that since he had remained in the city after these rumors, he should definitely come and look for him. At that moment, one of the residents suddenly ran up to the crowd and shouted loudly for them to pay attention to him. Everyone immediately turned around and was a little surprised. They were wondering what had happened. Then the man immediately replied that they were in complete chaos. Wild animals were digging up absolutely the entire harvest, and therefore they had absolutely nothing left. As soon as Hans heard this, he immediately began to think about the hunting competition that was about to take place very soon. And then he suddenly thought about how he could settle everything, and finally, a perfect idea came into his head. So he decided to share it with those around him. He believed that after his brilliant plan, Elena would simply have no choice but to be with him. So of course he wanted to put this plan into action. After some time, Elena became well aware of the fact that rumors had already spread, since there were practically no visitors to her store. But she thought about the fact that maybe it didn't matter much, because she wasn't worried about her reputation. She thought about the fact that maybe Hans could mention Jaden, and she certainly didn't want to ruin his life. The guy was moving boxes in the meantime, as it was his job. And she thought that if the city found out that an unmarried man and woman were living together, it would certainly cause a lot of noise and condemnation from the people. She even understood the danger that people could vote and kick Jaden out of the city because he was an outsider, and they could assume that he would somehow be a bad influence on their city. She wondered if there was any other choice to win people over to her side. And then suddenly, Elena thought about the fact that she could just pretend in front of everyone as if they had a relationship. She thought that perhaps this could play into their hands. At first, she was worried that this man might be an escaped slave. However, now that several days had passed and the pursuers still had not appeared, she realized that this was most likely not the case, and she should not worry anymore. Jaden supported her at that time, and she understood that if they wanted to continue living together, then she had to ask him about something in order not to attract unnecessary glances from others to herself and him. So when the man was working, she turned to him and asked if he would like to become her husband. As soon as the guy heard this, he was a little surprised, and there was an awkward silence between them. She decided that this was a great chance, because with it, Jaden would be able to stay there. And besides, the residents would stop bothering her about marriage, and she would not have to explain what kind of life position she adhered to. Smiling, she suggested that he sign a marriage contract and was also going to explain what exactly was beneficial about it. But as soon as Jaden asked what a marriage contract was, the girl thought about the fact that she didn't know if he even knew what a contract and marriage were. So she decided to explain everything at once. Elena said that marriage is when a man and a woman become a family, but she wanted them to have a fictitious marriage, which would look real to everyone else, but they would not be truly close. She explained that becoming a wedding couple is more than a promise between two people who love each other. It is about two people who believed that each other was closer than anyone else. Seeing his surprised expression, she immediately said that of course they wouldn't be a real couple, and it would all be just for show, so he couldn't think about anything strange. Elena explained that they simply had to pretend that they were together near the villagers in order not to arouse any suspicion. So she asked Jaden to be her husband, but of course she meant a fictitious husband. The man didn't answer this. He just stood there and thought about this proposal. The girl, in turn, began to worry a little. She thought that she had put too much on him. She was interested in what he thought about this marriage contract and, in general, how he felt about this idea, because he could, of course, not approve of it or not fully understand it. However, at last, after a long silence, he said that he was ready to do it. He smiled and said that he really wanted to become Elena's husband. And the girl, hearing this, was immediately happy because it was really just the perfect way out for her. In fact, she was really worried that he might refuse, but she assumed that he really understood what she meant and guessed that it was also beneficial for him. Therefore, she said that in that case, from now on, they had to work together. But at that moment, someone started knocking on their store door. The girl immediately got scared. Because customers had not come to her for a long time after that incident with Hans, she immediately turned to the man and said that someone had come there. So she asked him to leave the store for a while and wait until she checked who had come there. Then Elena went outside and saw Uncle Paul. She asked him for forgiveness and said that they were not ready to open yet, so she could not let him in. The man immediately answered her that he did not come to buy anything, he had other business. And Paul replied that the Lord had given orders for everyone to gather at a village meeting. He said that it was indeed very urgent and important, and that everyone was obliged to attend. Elena was, of course, a little surprised by this. She already wanted to offer him to go together in this case. But the man began to leave and said that he had another place where he still needed to go, so he could not go with her. Of course, she was surprised by such a reaction, because it was completely unlike her uncle. But she said that everything was fine, and she understood, so he was not obliged to accompany her there. She herself thought that most likely something had happened to her uncle, since he was behaving really suspiciously and strangely. Usually he was more friendly, but now he became so secretive. She even assumed that something was bothering him a lot. Then she suddenly saw Jade come up to her from behind and say that something had happened, so she needed to go to the square. Elena also asked if he could behave decently and just wait for her to come back to the store, quietly not showing that there was anyone there at all. The man, of course, did not object. He said that he would do it without any problems. After that, the girl immediately went to the main square because she was really interested in what had happened there. He looked at her with a sad expression, but in reality, he was still a little surprised by the decision they had made. But he was glad he was with a girl like her. And when Elena returned to this event, this terrible news happened there, which she learned, and Jaden also showed up there. The head of their town asked if it was true that the girl had gotten married, and that the man standing next to her was her husband. The girl herself was amazed. She did not understand how Jaden was able to find his way to this place and show up so on time. In fact, she didn't think that she would have to show him around and introduce him to the residents so soon, but she had no choice. Circumstances developed in such a way that she had to act. Elena assumed that it was probably for the best, so she put her hand on the man's chest and said, smiling, that in fact she really did decide to marry this man. The people around immediately started talking to each other. They couldn't believe that this was really true. Meanwhile, Elena asked them all for forgiveness for not being able to tell them about it earlier. One of the residents said that in that case, they would have to come up with another reward for the winners of the hunting tournament, because after all, she already had a reliable husband nearby, so they couldn't just do that. And Elena, smiling happily, said that, and he was not her husband yet. They had not yet managed to get married, but he was definitely going to do it in the near future. Smiling, the girl turned to the head and asked if it was true that the problem had been resolved, and she also said that Jaden should have also taken part in this tournament because he wanted to. The man, of course, did not like this, but he said that the more participants, of course, the better. For this reason, he did not object. The girl immediately smiled and said that in that case she was very happy and was counting on him. After this, the tournament finally arrived. Hans turned to his father and asked what he should do, because in this way he would definitely never marry unless the woman was as beautiful as Elena. The man's father himself was also very angry because he did not understand where this unknown guy came from and simply destroyed all his plans. Hans replied that he didn't really know because the guy didn't say anything when he asked him about it. Meanwhile, Jade was sitting under a tree all alone, but some young guys came up to him and said that he was just sitting there without a weapon and asked if he really planned to continue wasting time like this, without moving in the direction of victory. His friend at that moment told the guy to leave him because Elena was in any case strong enough to protect him if anything happened. The guy sighed heavily and said that he seriously did not understand what the girl could see in this weak man. However, at that moment, a wild boar suddenly started running out of the forest and was heading straight towards them. The people were immediately very scared. They did not understand what he was doing in broad daylight in a fairly open area. These guys who had a bow and arrow, as well as various swords, immediately started running away because they were scared. But Jade calmly stood there. When the guy got to his feet, I saw that the boar started running straight at him, and the people who had already moved to a safe distance did not understand why he did not even move to save his life. Jade, meanwhile, when the boar approached him, he swung and hit him with one hand. Thus, he killed him with just one blow. The other hunters, seeing all this around, were amazed for some time. They all stood silently and watched what happened. Jade, meanwhile, looked seriously at the head of the town and asked if he could finally leave in that case, since the tournament, in his opinion, was considered over.